This is the first part of a two-part discussion of Chuck Schuldiner's final two albums, focusing primarily on its lyrics and the themes and concepts they evoke. The content of Schuldiner's music took broadly three phases. These are not clear-cut as much as they are markers on a gradient. However, some albums do fit more neatly within one category than others. The first dealt with what was most gratuitous and easily enchanting, the fanciful and gory stuff of zombies, killing, mutilation, and dying, the kind of things that excite teenagers. The first two albums of scream bloody gore and leprosy seem to fit very clearly here. The second phase took on the distinctively human concerns of religion, addiction, truth, the inability to understand one another, jealousy, death, and symbolism. Most of Schuldiner's albums fit into this category, beginning with Spiritual Healing, which broke sharply with the gory material of its first two albums, and then Human, Individual Thought Patterns, and Symbolic. The third phase took an inward turn and focused on matters that concerns the divine, or at least the divine as far as human abilities are concerned, namely that of courage, hope, and artistic creation. Here Schuldiner's lyrics concern the mind and the human spirit itself, its perseverance, its experience of being crushed under its own invisible weight, its delight in suffering of both itself and others, its capacity to weave into being worlds through storytelling, its drive towards clarity, and its love to create. The album The Sound of Perseverance marks the beginning of this phase. Indeed, much of its material was intended for the new project, but there was still enough of the old vibe to mark it off as the last album of the band Death. I want to suggest that The Sound of Perseverance can be seen as a companion album to what became the first album of Schuldiner's new project of Control Denied, namely the album titled The Fragile Art of Existence. I'll refer to each of these simply as Perseverance and Existence respectively. The two albums, although part of different bands, can nonetheless be seen as two sides of the same coin. At least that is my thesis. Where one brings the titanic and raw voice of Schuldiner himself, coupled with perhaps the most technically complex performance by the band, the other brings the seemingly bottomless and Olympian singing of Tim Aymar. The instruments here are, comparatively speaking, more mellow and feel more drawn out, although the overall song patterns they employ are structurally funkier and jazz-like and unexpected. Where Perseverance flushes with aggression and action, Existence seems to be more reserved, holding back, providing a space for reflection. Perseverance deals with themes that are more sensuous in their nature: pain, suffering, the flesh, the voice. The album cover even has this image of a great maw opening up in the form of a mountain, upon which people seem to ascend only with great toil. On the other hand, Existence takes up a more mental material in its key topics: belief, expectation, history, infinity, the nature of tools, and artistic creation. The album here shows a frame with disembodied senses, particularly eyes and hands. Sight being the most theoretical sense. Our language is, after all, infused with metaphors of sight for mental activities such as understanding. Do you see? And the hands being the ultimate tools, shaping anything the mind can imagine. But what is also significant is how these elements are shown as disembodied, suggesting the mode of abstraction. To take an example from the philosopher Hegel, how is it that our judgment can pick out properties of a thing as distinct when, in reality, the properties are really of the same concrete thing? For example, a cube of sugar has a particular shape, color, taste, all of which we can distinctly hold apart in our minds, but in reality it is all of the same thing. Perhaps something of the same is at work in this album cover and its music. the idea of creation being both a disassembly and reassembly into new configurations. What gives any new configurations life, we can ask? Perhaps one thing is how well it can animate the mind, how well it can enthrall our imagination, or simply how good it sounds, how good it makes us feel. I will return to this enigma towards the end of this discussion, but now let us look closer at these two albums, the negative and the positive, the yin and yang, and the essential unity they together manifest. The first song of Perseverance deals with a particularly negative force, and it is a trap that the creative artist can easily fall into. This is the trap of pessimism, of unconstructive and unfriendly critique, the kind that is looking for every opportunity to take someone else down. Consider these words. Abstract theory, the weapon of choice, used by a scavenger of human sorrow. Abstract theory suggests that this activity is done from a distance, but we see that the critique from this type of person is essentially a noise that betrays their own lack of having something real. Shallow are the words from those who starve, for a dream not their own to slash and scar. The pessimist does not have a dream they can slash and scar because it is not brought into any kind of existence. The best defense against such a scavenger for our artist is not to engage with them. Just leave them to their misery. Live how you want, just don't feed on me. And so we should ourselves just leave the inner scavenger to its big words, for it all comes from a small mindedness. Where the scavenger hides behind their pain and let ineffectual complaining feed on it, the next song, Bite the Pain, offers a different course of action. I will not feed your hunger. Instead, I bite the pain. Looking not back but forward, I bite down hard. The artist must use passion as their shield and the vitality of the will to go toe-to-toe with the pain. In this way, the scavenger does not appear, but another danger appears. This is the spirit crusher. Psychiatrist Anna Lembke writes about how the brain seeks to maintain an equilibrium of pain and pleasure. If there is too much pleasure, the brain will attempt to balance it out with some pain. For example, I ate this delicious sweet, but I feel guilty afterwards for doing so. Likewise, too much pain will prompt the brain to balance it out with pleasure. The experience of a cold shower is alarmingly uncomfortable, but once you step outside, you feel an empowering and satisfying rush. Fighting pain with pain has some scientific grounding, and done with the right methods, it may even be wise. Holding on to the pain is debilitating, and it evokes from the depths a struggle and a war of attrition with oneself. It comes from the depths of a place unknown to the keeper of dreams. If it could, then it would steal the sun and the moon from the sky. Beware. No guilt, it feeds in plain sight. Spirit Crusher. Where the scavenger offers cheap delights that are outwardly directed, the Spirit Crusher is thrust upon the artist from within. It is a malevolent bitterness that actively enjoys its own misery. As the lines put it, its pleasure to taste, the blood that it bled. Here the path forward is, much like the previous song, to hold on. Stay strong and hold on tight. But there is also a new development. The final verse is illustrative. When it's time to feed, to fulfill the need to consume a breath, some will rise standing tall, breathing out all the breath from the voice of a soul. The Spirit Crusher is a malevolent parasitic being that can only feed on others, to consume a breath, but the proper reaction against this is not to deny the Spirit Crusher its consumption, but to combat it through generosity. As the lyrics suggest, some will rise and exhale all the breath, or the totality of the creative life-affirming activity, which will outpace the hypothetical desire of the fiend. This elemental self-rising being is properly the expression of freedom, or the voice of a soul. And there cannot be a voice without a story. The fourth song counters the negative energy of the Spirit Crusher by bringing into play the healing powers of narrative. One can be immersed in pain and suffering and let these elements take hold of one's life. But what does not crush the spirit sows the seeds for its flight. The body is divinely transformative learning machine. It is constantly at work, learning, adapting, changing, making better patterns, more efficient movement, an intention towards fluidity, a conglomerate of thought patterns intersecting. We will see this more clearly in the next song, but it is good to keep this in the background, since what immediately strikes one in one's experience of suffering is not the body per se, but the experience of pain. And one must confront this experience head on. This drifting inwards, as the song expresses it, becomes also a form of positing. In philosophy, positing is a form of reflection that puts something before one's mind. But this something is a wholly dependent form of being. And specifically, what is being placed before oneself is simply the idea of oneself, one's self-image, you might say. Now history, especially hurtful, has a tendency to bleed into this self-image and soil it with its evil. But the song's lyrics dissuade us from going off the path and instead call us into action. When you think of me in your multidimensional mind, try to wash the evil from your mind and open it. When you taste the truth, you will see like others before me. To you I am past, a story to tell. Tell it. Who is this me that the lyrics refer to? It may be what the psychologist Carl Jung called the shadow, but I think rather that this is the image we hold of our past selves. This image we hold that nonetheless seems to hold us in no less measure. It is taunting us with past failures and outstanding dreams. The song asks us to wash the evil and open it. What does it mean to open something? It means to unveil, to see inside, and see the matter for what it is. This opening is visceral in the lyrics, because the text turns next to the metaphor of tasting. Truth is something to be tasted, touched. Furthermore, it is not merely an individual instance, but see like others before me, and so we synthesize a number of selves in the image. All of this speaks towards a creative effort of the mind in order to understand itself. I am past is the fact, but what is not a fact is the story. The story has to be brought out by somebody. It cannot be something passive. It cannot merely happen. It cannot be merely a fact, but it must be something for someone. And in order to tell a story, it has to first be something for the one who tells it. But before any of that can take place, it needs to just be, to have an existence of its own. It needs to be told. But when the story is being told, the lyrics foretell of a tragic outcome. You may think you own the end. Take another close look at the script of sadness etched in the book. This sadness is the fact of finitude, over which nobody can claim ownership. The deep fate rooted within all of us that is the source of unassailable anxiety. This is the nemesis of courage, and its mystery is locked within the flesh. The philosopher Maurice Merleau-Ponty speaks of the body as being towards the world, a form of orientation that is neither an outside third-person causal determination nor an explicit inward first-person representational judgment. Its orientation towards the world is woven through time, through a continuous dialectic between its present state and the sedimentations of past states that together form a general anonymous and autonomous character. As such, the body is not in space as much as it lives it, and through its possibility forges intentions with its surroundings and projects itself therein. Our encounter with the world is thus meaningfully structured long before any reflectively cognitive faculties come into play. The song "The Flesh and the Power It Holds" explores the tacit depths of the body's mystery. When you live the flesh, it is the beginning of the end. It will take you in, it will spit you out. The body generates this duality between itself as a self-beholding being and other beholden being. Who is the you that the lyrics refer to, if not our everyday reflective cogito? The it is the body, and it is interesting how the words here designate thinghood of the body, whereas the cogito is made personal with a you. But all power rests with the thing, and the song focuses not just on its ordinary functions of touch, taste, breath, and projection, but also its ability to transcend itself. This is passion. Passion is a poison laced with pleasure bitter-sweet, one of many faces that hide deep beneath. Why is passion a poison? The other important clue is that of faces hiding deep beneath. Is passion one among many other emotions, each with their own face, or does the emergence of any face equal the equivalent electric surge of passion? I will take the second option, and I will bring to mind what Merleau-Ponty described as the habit body, in order to posit that passion is the release of a specific conjunction of cemented structure that has emerged as a strange familiar with a life of its own. And that, therefore, perhaps why it is a poison, is that this release of one autonomous body construct means the prevention, if not detriment, of others. Passion burns like fire carried by the wind, the end of a time to begin. It builds you up one way and tears you right back down. A time to begin, the end of a time. The body works in cycles. One does not eat, sleep, or heed nature's call only once, but repeatedly. Passion, however, is the cycle that attempts to transcend the regime of cycles altogether. This is why it is attuned with fire and air. It burns while it rises to new locations. But this in turn also reflects back on the animal body. It too is continually burning itself, consuming itself, whilst moving to find new desires and satisfactions. So perhaps transcendence and cyclicality are intimately bound, and that the power of the flesh is to go beyond itself, so that it can return to itself. Notice also the interesting mirroring taking place in the lyrics. The end of a time to begin, and then towards the end, a time to begin, the end of a time. Touch, taste, breathe, consumed. Before we move on to the next song, it is interesting to note that the term consumed here will be the title of the first song of the Control Denied album. This sets us up for the return to the flesh in the future. What seems like a crucial part of the concept of the album, given we have seen it repeated in the lyrics of others, and yet when we finally do come to the song bearing its title, there are no words to accompany it. What meaning are we to take from this? Is it that the soul itself is so pure that there are no words that can capture it, since there is something divine about the soul, much like God? Or is it that the soul is so malleable, flexible, and adaptable that it can take on any shape, pattern, combination of signs? Anywhere there is intelligibility, there the voice of the soul is. It is, in other words, the universal. Even without words, the music here is able to narrate a story. The simple sense of adversity and finding the power to overcome that adversity with perseverance, ingenuity, and beauty. Given that we have uncovered from the preceding, with the first, third, and possibly fifth songs pointing to a negative mode, that is, a testimony to the powerlessness and dangers of being human, and with the second and fourth songs positing a more positive mode, that is, aspirations of human beings to meet challenges head-on and fight, the instrumental here shines once more a positive mode. These are of course not isolated categories, as there is usually a bit of both in each, but that becomes especially the case with the fifth and the sixth songs forming a pair of their own. one dealing with the flesh and the power it holds, meaning you, as a self-conscious cogito, are powerless in regards to it, and the other dealing with the soul, the fragile and ephemeral element, if element is the right word here. But we need not keep a dualism of two substances here. If anything, the album is the attempt to weave these two forms of being together, to see their interdependence and integration. It is the soul, the self-conscious mind, that recognizes and respects the power of the body, and in cultivating it, taking care of it, it also takes care of itself, and feels its passion. Forgive is to suffer is perhaps the love song of the album, or at least how one relates to other people. From what is written, it concerns more the attitudes of how one is being overly accepting towards slights and issues rather than an act of proper forgiveness. The philosopher Jacques Derrida speaks of forgiveness in terms of forgiving the unforgivable. Only at that level, when it is impossible, then forgiveness is genuinely possible. And so forgiveness is a kind of open transgression, taking on tremendous strength and courage. What the song here points to is rather something more deceptive. Words so sharp, action stark, hide the blade of the deceiver. But there may even be an existential message here too. To accept another day, we choose to give away another piece of life. To forgive is to suffer. We accept another day of not just saying okay, but enforcing it. To say this is fine may be in regard to a person, but it may also be said in regards to one's own circumstances. Once or twice is kind, 3 or 4 is blind. It is not the end, yet a way to begin. The power of words, both good and bad. The real target of the song is therefore a kind of living that is parasitic, that merely goes with the flow, just let things happen, is passive, reactive, and only picks up from others. You may have thought it already. This is becoming the scavenger. The album has come full circle and clarity is reached. Clarity being something that always speaks from within. Enforce the words no more. Be free. Alone, you might just find serenity. Clarity is a fundamentally transformative experience. It is a realization that brings with it a new conviction. One sees new patterns in reality and makes use of things differently, perhaps more efficiently and more truly. The mind has expanded and has made obsolete its previous state of conviction. John Vervaeke speaks of psychotechnology, about how the human mind generates and deploys new techniques which develop higher and more comprehensive information gathering. Examples which include language, the alphabet, and so forth. The development from a child to adult is one such where, through critical training, illusions become dispelled. One such example, to borrow from Vervaeke, is when a child is presented with 2 rows of 5 dots. The lower row has more space between the dots, and when asked, the child will always pick the lower row because it believes that the space between the dots means it is bigger. But as an adult, you know that the spaces are empty and do not contribute anything to the dots as such. Notice that what is at stake here is not strictly the object, but how it is understood, and that our powers of understanding are themselves malleable, changeable, open to development, and open to be discarded. Notice also that while there is joy, there must also be pain in this process, since the discarding of a previous mode of understanding also means the discarding of a world, and all that was once cherished through it. The final song of the album, excluding the Judas Priest cover, opens with the lines, "I would describe it as an invisible darkness, casting a shadow, a blinding black. Guarded by hope, my soul is kept safe from the bloody claws." The interesting opening of someone describing something suggests the voice here speaks from after the moment of clarity, and that it now is reporting on the outcome. Clarity has made clear that there was an invisible darkness, a casting shadow, a blinding black. The mode of clarity cannot come ahead of itself, for then there would be no darkness, no negative, and no development. But people do pass through darkness, and this itself becomes a phenomenon to be understood rather than dismissed. One can point to the irony here that hope plays a dual role in that keeping one safe from the darkness is precisely what maintains it. This dynamic of what is and is not correlates to the other important element mentioned explicitly in the song at several points, namely hope. Ordinarily, hope is characterized as a kind of wishful thinking, a dream of something as yet completely unrealized and perhaps even unrealizable. The theologian Paul Tillich, however, does not think that this captures genuine hope, which he thinks is always rooted in something already given. Real hope, then, stretches between what already is and what is not, like the seed being on its way to becoming a tree. There is no certainty that it will, but it is a real possibility grounded in the fact of its existence. The seed will try its damnedest to become what it is meant to be, but in a way that follows a mere mechanical recipe. It must be flexible and dynamic enough to adapt to a range of surroundings if it is not only to survive, but also to grow well. Hope is thus a plastic driving force that is inherently open, yet deeply motivated. As Paul Tillich writes, quote, "Such openness is the highest activity. It is the driving force which leads us toward the growth of something new in us. And the struggle between hope and despair in our waiting is a symptom that the new has already taken hold of us." End of quote. Hope, therefore, is the manifestation of perseverance, the living and aspiring force that propels us onward, and it can propel us onward because a part of it is already realized. In being hopeful, a moment of that hope has already been achieved. So, in hope, you do not start in the red with debt and sin and any other form of the negative, but you start in the black, with ability and means, a real connection to the good and the possibility of virtue. Clarity is bearing witness to hope. It is the feeling of hope through the sight that sees existence as already demonstrating that the good is not in some beyond, but here, at work, as a power that is generous yet mighty. You are here, clarity unveils to us, and that already is proof of a genuine and living hope. The new has already taken hold in us, no less than it being us. But clarity does not only show retrogressively what has been at work, but simultaneously provokes us forward to see further. And the first pre-chorus plays deviously with the metaphor of sight. Look to beyond, what vision lets me see. Here the lyrics ask to look beyond what is possible through sight, and yet one is precisely asked to look. How can one see independent of sight? Remember the blind prophet of Apollo, Tiresias, who appears in the ancient Greek plays of Oedipus and Antigone. If we draw on the ancient metaphor, clarity is the sight that must take its cue from something other than what is immediately there. It does not look at things out there, but looks at things within, the wider context, let's say. So the former does not exclude the latter, and one needs to have a grasp of sensuous sights and sounds, but to comprehend what is going on points to a process that transcends these and abides by its own imperative. Perhaps this is the invisible darkness mentioned at the beginning. That would be an alternative view. The pre-chorus continues. Time after time, unneeded misery. Temporality plays an important mediating role, and there is also a practical incentive to banish useless misery. The mindset of perseverance is to meet challenges in order to become better, not wallow in needless obstruction. There is therefore a life-affirming element to the perseverance mindset. Life proper is the ultimate defiance, for it negates easy classification. As the second verse puts it, life is like a mystery, with many clues but with few answers, to tell us what it is that we can do to look for messages that keep us from the truth. This is a twisted verse, since it seems to end with a statement about messages that keep us from the truth. And one would think that the answers would positively point us to the truth and keep us to it. But this negative sense is vital, and it conceals an existential element. The answers that are in the mode of being told are at best those which show which way not to take. But why can they not show us the way to take? This is because the way of truth cannot be told or shown, but has to be made and discovered. Clarity is this mode of consciousness that both generates a new path and shows it to have always been there. Nobody can give you this, just as nobody can learn on your behalf or experience what you experience. The truth of this cannot be given, but must be realized autonomously. Clarity thus leaves us with the most important gift, which is the gift of freedom. It is in your hands, your turn to ask why.